The girl approached the man and called him father, but then changed her mind and called him head of the family. She had a wreath in her hands and said it was a gift from Leia. The man looked at her with an angry look and asked how dare she call him father. "What kind of nonsense is that?" she said, "and let him get out of my way." Leonora Estrella de Hachania. She is the only daughter of Duke Hachania, and the illegitimate child of the imperial family. She wanted to be loved, but in the end, everyone turned their backs on her because of her background. Leonora originally grew up as the Duke's favorite daughter, but one day, along with the news that her mother had gone missing while traveling, the oracle appeared and said that Leonora was the illegitimate child of the imperial family. Duke Hachania, because of his wife's betrayal, turned his back on his daughter and neglected her. And at the age of 19, Leonora, who had suffered from an incurable disease from a young age, in the end, she died. This is a description of a love fantasy novel. The girl's life is the narrative of a minor character of the villain family in the novel. The bloody affair she ended up in. Yes, and a minor character. But worst of all, into the body of the villain's family's daughter, Leonora Stella de Hachania. The girl could not understand whether all this should happen to the child in whose body she found herself. She is abandoned by her father, and in addition, she dies alone from an incurable disease. The girl thought she didn't want to put up with this plot, and there was no way she was just going to go with the flow. She uses any method to avoid this fate. For the sake of this, the secondary characters and the villain father who was only supposed to appear in the prologue, she's going to change them all, and make Hachania's family prosper and improve her health. She will use everything she has, and she will surely survive this duchy. That is her goal. The boy knelt down and began to plead with Leia. The girl asked him what was wrong and what he wanted. Enoch asked if he could rest for 5 minutes. Leonora looked at the boy and told him to repeat after her, "Hachanias, do not cry." When Enoch repeated after her, she told him to perform 100 swings of the wooden sword. The boy replied that he was on his way to do it. When the girl interrogated what was wrong with his voice, he shouted with all his might that he was performing. At this moment, he took the wooden sword and began to carry out the girl's order with a tired look. Leonora, watching all this, wondered when they would grow up. She still had a long way to go, but if she doesn't, their family, as secondary characters, will easily be destroyed. Here she is, back. It was after that incident that the girl realized she was in a world of romance. When the girl was with her father, a workman came running in and told them that they said the lady's ship had capsized in the Straits of Ariana. The man couldn't believe his ears, and told him to tell him everything down to the smallest detail. This is definitely the girl's first time in a situation like this, but for some reason she feels it's familiar to her. Leonora looked at her father with a pitying look and asked, "What's going on?" The man hugged the girl and told her not to worry because Noelle would definitely come back to them. The girl realized it was her mother's name, but she wondered what her father's name was. When Leah put her hand on her father's cheek, he asked, "Is she really comforting him now?" and smiled sweetly. The laborer told His Excellency to let some more things be reported. He said some say it was the work of Saint-Tropez pirates who were targeting Empress Inez. Empress Inez was so stubborn and wanted to go along with Noelle, but in the end, the Emperor said there was no point in blaming anyone right now and asked, "Doesn't Empress Inez have a younger daughter left, whose name is Ains?" When the girl heard this, at that moment her thoughts, which could not gather in any way, instantly became clearer. Memories from her past life began to return, and she remembered reading the story. At that moment Leonora shouted out her father's name, Gaspar. When he heard that, he said that finally the girl could pronounce his name correctly, and said that it was right. His name was Gaspar. And in that moment she remembered everything. Where she had seen Papa's name, and what this place she now lived in. Gaspar Desare de Hachania, a family that was exterminated without blinking an eye, from a novel she read in a past life before she died. Even their last name has a meaning. It means insignificant. But the girl could not understand why she had become a minor character, and then she remembered that she had moved into the body of a minor villain who only appears in the paralogue. In her past life, she lived quietly and did as she was told. Her adoptive father, the head of national security, chose the path for her to follow. She followed in his footsteps and became a special agent, learning everything related to it. The girl believed that someday her foster father would recognize her, that he loved her as his own daughter, and she would live in a normal family with a normal life. But she was betrayed by her adoptive father, and died alone. Until now, the girl had lived happily as the youngest daughter of the ducal family, with no memory of her past life. So also according to her memories, Leonora, the youngest daughter of Duke Gaspar, will leave this mortal world at the age of 19 from illness. Then suddenly the emperor turned to the maid and said that from the look of it, Leah did not seem to be well. Let her pay special attention to it. At this rate, it's not just Gaspar and her, but the entire Hachania family that's going to have a horrible, deadly ending. The girl is not going to live a life of longing for someone else's love as a past life, but she is just a minor character that her father loves very much. Now that she's remembered everything, she's not going to let this novel's plot move forward. The girl has two goals. First is to survive herself, and then to make sure the whole family survives. At this point, Leonora went to her brother's room and thought she would teach them. When the girl came into Enoch and Sylvie's room, she said she needed their help, despite the fact that the girl, and made a promise to herself that she would not let the affair go according to the plot, but it's been like 3 years living in the body of a child. During this time, she realized that she was naive and turned out it was not so easy to find a solution. The blonde-haired guy who looks so innocent, like an angel descended from heaven, is the third brother. His name is Enoch Gwendal de Hachania, and the other guy who has looks that are every bit as good as Enoch is the second brother, Sylvester Adgard de Hachania. Looking at their faces, it's hard for her to deny that she's fallen into the world of romance because the guys are too handsome, and if they were the main characters, she wondered if they would notice that she was a trapped woman. After all, she wasn't living the plot of the novel to this day. The brothers asked what was wrong with her. She might be sick, but when Sylvie touched her forehead, he said it didn't look like she had a fever. Leonora thought they were so calm and kind, but to die just because they are secondary characters is very mean. Then suddenly a man came into their room and told the boys that it was time for training. Enoch told the barista that they would be right there. At this point he turned to the girl and said that if she was sick, let her be sure to tell and not be silent, and they would be back soon. Enoch told his brother that it would be hard to focus on practice because of his worry for his sister. Leonora assumed the boy wanted to skip class, and she told him to take his hands away from her, which he kept on his cheeks. The boy hugged the girl and told her not to be sick and they would be back soon. Leonora at this moment thought it was very strange, but after the return of past life memories, it was somehow unusual and awkward, because no one had ever treated her like that before in her past life. Then suddenly Sylvie said that the girl was acting slimmer today than usual, and asked, "Maybe she has something wrong?" Then suddenly a barristan's voice was heard, asking what that boy was doing there, and have him go quickly to practice. Leonora, at this point, thought she couldn't tell just yet, and realized that meeting them hadn't helped her much so far. So the girl decided to get down to business, and she needs to get to grips with the situation now. She walked over to the table and picked up a piece of paper and thought that if she wrote in Korean letters, no one should understand. The girl began to write down her name, and opposite wrote that she was the only daughter of the Hachania family, her age 3 years. She is destined to die of an incurable disease at the age of 19. Father Gaspar, Duke of the Empire of Villanin, and the Emperor's right-hand man. But that's just for now. Her mother and Duchess Noelle are next, the only female admiral in the Empire. After giving birth, she set sail with her close friend the Empress, and 3 years later was kidnapped by pirates, going missing. If so, think about it. That rumor started right after Noelle went missing. Among Hachania's children, there is one who inherited the blood of the imperial family, so the oracle told everyone. Rumors spread that Noelle had colluded with a member of the imperial family, and that the proof was the content on the scroll. In addition to the sadness of losing his wife, Gaspar was devastated to learn from rumors that she had betrayed him, and guessing that the illegitimate child was Leonora, gradually turned away from her. However, he soon refused to obey the imperial family, and the cause of this treason was the death of Leonora. I mean her death, because the only cure for this disease is an elixir. Reached the protagonist of the novel, who suffered from the same disease, namely, Inez. The death of his daughter, from whom he had turned his back, was the cause of the betrayal. But the girl thought it didn't add up somehow. Perhaps it was the character of Gaspar, a pathetic minor character who could never kick out an illegitimate child, began to feel a piercing sense of guilt when Leonora, suffering from an illness, eventually died. The original story didn't exactly specify which of the children was illegitimate, but it's still Leonora, since her 3 brothers look a lot like Gaspar. As soon as this rumor spread, her affectionate father, followed by the entire duchy, turned on her without blinking an eye. If she leaves it alone, she'll die early in this life, so she has to somehow get the elixir first. But first you have to overcome the endless desert behind him and the great ocean. The only person who can get his hands on the one-of-a-kind elixir is not the protagonist, and not even His Highness the Emperor, but Leonora's first brother, whose face she had never seen, a guy named Zachary. So why did her first brother give the elixir to Inez and not her, his own sister? That's because Zachary was the second main male character in the original, and apparently for him to see his beloved Inez suffer, apparently for him it was completely incomparable to his dying little sister. As always, the male protagonist is usually a fool who sees nothing but love. Things would have been easier if Zachary had given the elixir to Leonora, but the likelihood of him doing so is almost nil. After she remembered her past life, the headache only got worse, as it felt as if her body had become heavy. Then suddenly a ducal maid named Lulu, as well as Lala, came into the girl's room and told the young mistress that it was time for a snack. Lala approached the girl and asked what she was so busy doing that she hadn't even heard the knock on the door. Leonora could not understand why they had come now. At that moment, the maid took the pieces of paper, but the girl shouted that it was nothing special. She thought that she could not let her realize that they were letters. Lulu said she thought she was learning and she was doodling. But their young mistress, even the doodles are so cute. Leonora thought it was a good thing she was still a child. The maids gave her food and wished her a pleasant appetite. Lala said that Robertie's cook couldn't make her favorite juice because the ingredients for it were missing. Today she would bear it somehow, and tomorrow the girl would be sure to bring it. Leonore said it was all right and she didn't mind, but Lulu came closer to her and said what should they do. The young mistress seemed to be upset. The second maid replied that the cook said he would be sure to make it tomorrow, but that wasn't what the girl was upset about. She'd want to get full while she could, because once word spreads that she's the illegitimate child of a member of the imperial family, and everyone in this place will turn their backs on her. When evening came, it rained hard, and the girl thought that when it rained like that, Daddy always stayed and was there for her. But he didn't come today. Leonore thought that perhaps it was for the best, because somewhere now he must find out that she was a complete copy of the wife who had betrayed him, but really a bastard child. Leonora sat down and felt sad. She thought she must be going crazy. The mere thought of her dad just being absent frightened her. It seemed that if her body had become childlike, her mind was beginning to adjust to it. Compared to the loneliness in her past life, the time she spent with her father was but a moment, but she already misses his warmth. Around this time, rumors spread throughout the estate, and even Lulu and Lala will no longer side with her. Leonora thought, I have become weak, and if this continues, I will not survive in this world. The girl shook herself and thought to pull herself together and focus on what she had to do now, namely to get the elixir by any means necessary. But it would not be so easy. In the morning, when the girl woke up, she was very surprised, because the maids came into her room. They wished her good morning, and Lulu said that mistress was so sweet even after her nap. The girl couldn't understand what they were doing here. Why was this no different from a normal morning? Maybe they hadn't heard the rumors yet. When Leonore wanted to say something to them, the guards came into their room. Lala screamed and asked what they were doing, how they were able to just walk into the young duchess's room like that. But the guards looked at each other and said it was time to begin. The maids couldn't understand what was going on. They told them not to dare touch the duchess's things. The girl knew it. The guard said that the Duke had ordered them to move the young lady's room to a separate estate. Leonora couldn't understand what was happening because she was no longer part of the family. The maids didn't understand what it meant. One of them suggested that maybe it was because of those rumors. Leonora thought they already knew. Suddenly the guard said that since they were servants of the manor, they could no longer serve the girl, so they must leave. But it was all right. The girl was ready for it. The little girl was taken to a small estate in the middle of the woods. When she was dropped off, the guard said the dirt and ground was very slippery, so she had to be careful. When they started unloading things, one of them said they should stop for a while because she was having a hard time. She was just a child, and asked if anyone should take her in their arms. But the other said not to even think about it. The other asked what was good in her to take in her arms and even carry. She is a bastard child who betrayed their duke of a woman. The other said to watch his words because there was no direct evidence that the young lady Leonora was in question. She had been sectioned off until a decision could be made. The girl at this moment thought that they didn't watch their words in front of the child at all. If they had been her subordinates in a past life, that girl wouldn't just let it go. She would have dealt with them properly. When they reached the separate building, the girl thought they were finally there. Her legs hurt so much that she thought she was going to die. Leonora thought it was very hard to survive in a child's body. At that moment, one of the guards turned to Mrs. Nora and said that they had brought her things, and it was time for them to return. The girl was very surprised to hear this. But when she turned around, she saw a woman who said she would take care of the rest, and asked the young mistress if she had come already, though she said it was not yet known if she could continue to be called young mistress. The girl has been moved to parts of the mansion that have not been cared for in a long time, unlike the main building. The servants don't even show their noses in there. Once there, the girl begins to realize that she is now cast off. But in any case, the time spent in the annex will not last long, because the emperor will soon decide that she is the illegitimate child among the Hachania family, and will soon summon her. For fear of spreading rumors that the imperial family's lineage is tainted, there was no way the girl could succeed beyond the hole, and the girl turned around and asked if she could move faster. She was actually very busy, and at the end she added, "Unlike the one who just exists in vain." Leonora, hearing this, was very surprised. She couldn't believe that the girl had said such a thing. She thought she would have to be patient. Duke Hakanaya's servants, who are very loyal to Gaspar, might not like the fact that the girl is a bastard child. And yet the girl did not understand this woman's feelings for Gaspar. Simple devotion or something more. When they got to the room, the girl opened it and said that Leonora would use the room. Before she left, she said that if she didn't understand something, let her ask her now. Leonora asked what she had said earlier. Those who exist uselessly. That's who she was talking about. Nora smiled and asked what she thought. Waiting for an answer, she said, "Of course, about the Duke's dead wife. She was a petty and unfaithful woman, and the result of this sordid affair was a young lady." Leonora didn't understand why all the servants in this family were like her, daring to say such a thing to a child at all, but told her that this is a dirty woman. How dare she even dare to give their beloved head of the family? Even the boat turned over. This is her punishment. If it were her, she would always be there to keep their Duke safe. Leonora was shocked. Her mom, whose face she can't even remember now, is being abused. Why the hell should she put up with that? So she said it was time for Nora to wake up from her slumber. Whatever happened, her father didn't care about her. Nora, hearing this, interjected, "What had she just said? How could it be? She's not his child, and there's foul blood running through her." At that moment, the girl dropped her backpack and flew straight at her new maid. The guards, who had just moved a short distance from the manor, did not realize what the sound was, but it sounded like it was coming from inside the house. At that moment, Leonora grabbed the girl by the hair, and no matter how much she tried to break free, she couldn't. She didn't understand how the child had so much strength. When she did manage to break free, Nora took a swing at the girl, but she was very surprised when she saw that the girl didn't even blink an eye. She couldn't understand what normal child in this situation wouldn't even move. At that moment, guards ran into the manor and asked the girl what was wrong. Nora, sending off her hair, replied that it was nothing. It was just that Mrs. Leonora was not yet accustomed to her new surroundings. The girl realized she had lied, thinking that Nora wasn't stupid after all and valued her life. Leonora understands when her family and servants openly express opinions, but she will not put up with being looked down upon by those like her. The girl walked up to one of the guards, tugged on his sleeve, and told him she just wanted to eat. But at that moment, she decided that she would act like a normal child. In fact, she was really hungry, for she had to expend a lot of energy. The guards looked at Nora with a judgmental look. Then she turned to the girl and told her to wait a moment. In the evening, when Leonora was alone, she went out on the terrace and thought she was very strong as a child, and suggested that maybe there was some sort of mana in this body. With that, we could find a way to live with sometime when things settled down. Perhaps the girl could learn how to control her mom using the plot of the novel. She thought she would have to try different ways. Suddenly there was a knock on her front door. Leonora wondered who was there, for there should be no one else who came to her door. Then she suggested that maybe it was Nora who had come to take revenge. At that moment the door opened and the girl recognized her cook, Roberti. The man came in and greeted her. Leonora was not expecting it and shouted out his name. Then he said he was surprised that she even remembered the name of a man of such low birth as he was. When the girl asked what he was doing here, the man pulled a bottle out of a bag and said he had brought juice for her. Robert said that he had heard that she had gotten really upset yesterday about not getting juice. It bothered him, so he decided to make it for her. Leonora couldn't believe he had come to her for this. Taking the jar from him, she thanked him. But at that moment another guy came into the room and asked what he had just given Leonora. The two of them turned around. The cook apologized, and the girl couldn't understand what Sylvester was doing here. But the boy ignored the cook's apology and said he asked what he had just given Leonora. Assumed he came here because he heard the rumors. Robert couldn't answer the gentleman's question and began to get very nervous. Leonora thought at that moment, not to be intimidated by the child, but to stand up for what was right. Sylvester told Robert to answer. The cook said he wanted to give the young mistress juice. Then the boy asked on whose orders. When Robert remained silent, the man asked if he had gotten permission from the Duke. The man said he had not. Leonora was angry with her brother. She couldn't understand why he had no business coming all this way to fight with her about not liking the cook taking care of a child out of wedlock. Then the girl said she wouldn't drink it, and asked Roberty to take it back. But as she began to pass it around, the cook failed to pick it up properly and the bottle fell over. Leonora noticed that she had hurt herself on her leg, and said it was just a small scratch and that she was fine. But at that moment Sylvester came to her and took her in his arms. She then asked Roberti to get the doctor right away. The brother turned to the girl and asked, "Does it hurt?" placing her on the couch. Leonora thought he was so worried about a little scratch. Even though he had just tried to take away the juice himself, the girl couldn't understand at all what he was thinking. Came because he wanted to say something. Sylvester didn't have the friendly nature that Enoch had, so he was clumsy in expressing his feelings. But the girl felt that he cared for her, because she's his little sister. At least she used to be, but not anymore. Sylvester repeated his question and said that if she wanted, he could examine the wound. When he reached closer to her, the girl shoved him away and told him to go away. She thought to stop expressing feelings for their future. It had to be that way. And Leonora repeated for him to leave. The boy asked Leonora if she really wanted him to leave. The boy asked Leonora if she really wanted him to leave. Asked her why. In that moment, she thought she didn't want to repeat the mistakes of her past life. It's late, but she's trying to put the feelings aside, at least for now. Maybe it's all just a dream in which she wanted to have a family. Leonora thought, "Why?" Sylvester asked. But the girl told him not to call her that. When the guy asked why her, the girl replied that he was not her brother. When Sylvester heard this, those words popped into his head. He couldn't hear anything else. After a few minutes he asked what it meant. At that moment the girl felt a sudden chill. She assumed that he was using Manu on the child. The boy kept asking for her to answer him. Leonora wondered how she could respond if he froze her mouth. He himself had initially reacted so sharply for some reason. She didn't understand. It was a colder sensation than was described in the book. If it continued like this, it would be dangerous. A cold that stiffened to the tips of my fingers. At that moment a doctor and a maid ran into the room. She asked the young gentleman what he was doing. Lulu wanted to get closer to the young mistress and asked if she was all right. But Sylvester told her to stay away because he needed to hear Leonora's answer. At this point, the girl thought that he must be out of control because of what she said. She wants someone to help her, but she can't say a word. Sylvester said in a cold voice for her to answer. The girl whispered that she was very cold. Then he asked again because he hadn't heard anything. Leonora shouted with all her might that she was cold. The guy was very surprised. He didn't expect to use Manu. The girl started to feel dizzy because of the cold. At this point she started to fall and thought that she would deal with Sylvester later and tell her father everything. But at that moment she remembered that she no longer had a father. With these thoughts, Leonora passed out. When she woke up, it was evening outside. When she opened her eyes, she didn't realize where she was. Well, then suddenly she heard the Count's voice saying that she was awake at last. The girl was very surprised to see her daddy. Leonora couldn't understand what Papa was doing in the annex. She wondered if he had come here because he was worried about her. Suddenly the girl sneezed. She apologized, but the father said it was nothing. Sylvester was behind the curtain, and his father, seeing him, said he could see him perfectly well. Leonora wondered how long he had been standing there watching. His father turned to Sylvester asking if he had something to say to his sister. The boy stepped closer to her. His father looked at him angrily, telling him to say something already. At that moment, she thought, a strange rumor had reached him this morning. He'd come to the outhouse, but for some reason he was upset that Leia was doing well without them. The boy apologized to her. Leonora wondered if he really thought that he had apologized, and everything would magically become all right. After all, she could have died, so she turned away from him, and said she didn't want to talk to him. Then the Count spoke, addressing his sister, and said that Sylvester had been wrong to use Manu, but her brother apologized, and to ignore the apology is completely wrong. The girl couldn't believe that he was taking the side of someone who hadn't even properly apologized to her. It made her feel resentful. Knowing she wasn't his sister, coming to the annex must have been some sort of sympathy. At this point the girl sneezed again, but her father looked at her sternly. Then she thought it didn't work. Then she thought she had no choice. Sylvester was attacking her. Even experienced people find it difficult to control Manu. Then she said okay. She forgives him. Sylvester turned to Leonora and thanked her for forgiving her. At that moment she thought he was so happy for her to forgive him. Kachania's family is such a gentle, characterful family. The next day she forgave Sylvester and let him go. But the truth was, she would never forgive him. It hurt like hell. She doesn't understand why she's going through all this. In this world, the special knights who could handle mana are called soul knights. There were attributes that represented the 4 seasons of mana, and even handling the aura of a single season required great talent. Among them, Sylvester was a winter knight born with the mana attribute of winter. Even a brief exposure to the mana of a winter knight could easily freeze the earth and people. It must have been too much for Leonora's weak body. That suddenly Lulu came up to her and asked if she could get her anything. The girl asked if she could be here. The maid said the master had authorized it, and she needn't worry about it now. Leonora wondered what her father was up to. Lulu said the girl had taken her medicine, so she'd be asleep soon. Leonora assumed he'd just melted for a while toward her, because her daddy is very soft in character, or he still thinks of her as family, while he hasn't found out the whole truth yet. Leonora thought that she must not be so deluded again. She had no right to make a mistake, and with these thoughts the girl fell asleep. Suddenly she heard someone's voice. It was Enoch. He called out to the girl and asked if she was all right. He had a worried look on his face. When he saw that the girl woke up, he was very happy, then asked if she even knew that she had slept for 2 days. When Leonora heard that, she was surprised that it took so long, but then she asked what he was doing here. Isn't it training time? The boy said he thought he couldn't concentrate at practice and came here. Enoch said he was very worried about her. The girl looked at him suspiciously. Then he asked if she didn't believe him. When the girl said not really, he replied that he was in truth worried about her. Leonora thought to herself, what's the use of skipping training? He wouldn't even be her brother anymore, wasting her time. When he started touching her nose, she said it hurt, but he wouldn't stop doing it. And then, the girl got very angry and punched him in the face, telling him she was hurt and to stop doing it. Enoch said she was getting a little older and was beating like that. When she was little, she couldn't even talk yet, and she followed him around all day for him to hold her. He asked her if she remembered such a thing. Leonora replied that he was lying and it had never happened, but the boy said it was true. They talked for a long time afterward, and Leonora told him the whole situation. Enoch asked how she could tell her brother that he was no longer her big brother, and asked why she had done so. Thought she did it to get her feelings out, but she can't say that. So she said that because Sylvie isn't her brother. He asked why isn't it a brother, and then added, then who is she? When the girl wanted to say, or else, she thought he might react the same way Sylvester did. So she said he was still her brother. When he heard that, he said that he could go to practice in peace. At that moment, Leonora thought that he had said he couldn't train because he was worried about her. When he left, the girl thought Enoch was a minor character. She only remembered that he and Gaspar had been killed by the Emperor. I think he had some other role. No matter how much she tried, she couldn't remember. She thought it would be nice if she had more information from the original. She wondered if there was some sort of buff from being hit by a secondary character's body. And at that moment, something began to glow brightly above her head. When she got out of bed, a book appeared beside her and hit the back of her head. Leonora hadn't expected such a turn of events. when the girl saw it and ran up, and she couldn't believe that it was the original text. She thought that at last her prayer had been answered. At that moment she thought she should check it out now. When she opened it, she started reading. It said that the baby sent by the pirates of Saint-Tropez with the head of the Empress Inez was just Stitches crying, and that baby's name was Inez. Then Leonora realized that it was indeed the original. She didn't understand how this had happened. She was curious about the contents of the novel, and then this book fell. She couldn't believe that heaven was helping her to get what she wanted. Then the girl began to voice her desires. A mountain of treasure, immortality, leveling up alone. Nora, who was passing by, couldn't understand what she was doing there. When Leonore realized that it wasn't working, she decided to continue reading the book. Emperor Gregor then said, "Imprison the princess in the palace. Those who oppose it have their heads cut off." The emperor tried to ease the pain of his bereavement. Leonora was surprised when she read this. She wondered if he was some kind of lunatic. It's understandable, though. She'd had a titanic upbringing, turned away from his wife, who had gone on a trip without telling him she was pregnant, but never did because his wife returned with a dead baby in a crate. The girl was reading, but when she wanted to turn the page and find out what was next, she saw that there were blank sheets. She didn't understand how that could be, but after watching for a while longer, she noticed that the letters were beginning to appear on their own. It said that Inez didn't even know the face of her father Gregor. She was sent to an old estate where no one came to see her. However, around the age of 2, Inez realized that she had been reborn. She is a princess of the Willinan Empire. At that moment, Leonora thought that Leonora should come to her as soon as possible. To live a comfortable childhood with such a weak body, she needs to absorb a huge amount of her mana. Understood that around this time the oracle should appear, and the girl would be turned away by everyone in the duchy because she had a hand in spreading the rumors. And Ars was glad that she would no longer be in pain like she was before. She wants her mana vault to come to her as soon as possible. Leonora, when she read about it, was very surprised. She did not know how to understand it. The girl didn't understand how the main character Inez could be reborn. She thought it was all crazy. Leonora, at the girl's words about mana absorption, realized that she didn't remember previously reading about it. Things have changed. The content of the book seems to fill in as events unfold, and only the description of the Empress's accident at the beginning of the novel was written as in the original. If Leonore goes to the Imperial Palace like this, she won't be able to fight back, no matter what Inez does. So now she must stay at the manor under any circumstances. Then the girl went to the dresser and wondered if there was anything useful in there to take with her. But after taking a good look around, she realized there was nothing at all. Then her only option is to break through, and at that moment she left. When she arrived at the manor, she was told that the Lord was not present. Leonora said that she would then wait for her papa outside. But Jan, their servant, replied that she could not stay in the corridor outside the study. At that moment the girl thought that her father's assistant had not behaved like this before. Then she turned to Henry and said that she would give him this. With those words she held out her fist to him. The man was surprised and asked what he did it for. Leonore said that he worked very hard to help his father, and she herself thought that she was a child and could not prepare gold or any riches as a bribe. After that, she gave him some candy in his hands. Henry thanked her, and then she asked him to give one candy to his father. Then she waved to Henry and said she would be on her way, and thought that if she came tomorrow she could see Gaspar. But at least that's what she thought. When she came in the next day, Henry apologized to her and told her that the gentleman was not in today. She came back the next day. He said she should leave, and the next day the same thing happened again. Leonora went outside and thought that, any way you look at it, her father is just avoiding. She tried to stay in the Duke's family by attacking Gaspar's weak heart, but if even elementary can't meet him, then there's no point. And if it keeps going on like this, it's gonna get complicated. She sat under the tree and thought that she was no longer his daughter, but resented him for changing. She suggested that maybe it was because of the love she had received from him so far. Who knows? But right now she just wants to see him smile. With those thoughts, she gathered flowers and wove a large wreath, thinking that she would try to get into his office again. As she ran toward him, she thought that this time she should certainly be allowed into the office, for Gaspar was a man who was happy with even such a small gift. Even sympathy would do. After all, he came to visit her when she was sick. All this time she was running and not looking at her feet. She was in her own thoughts. She didn't notice and accidentally crashed into someone, hiding her wreath behind her back. She wondered who it was she might have run into. When she looked up, she saw her father. Gaspar looked angrily at the girl and asked, "Who was it that she called Daddy?" He said the girl was obstructing his passage and let her move out of the way. The girl tried to reassure herself, saying that it was okay. He was just angry about Noelle's betrayal, and it wasn't her fault. When she called him head of the family and said she wanted to give him this, with those words she handed him a wreath she had woven herself. As the man took it in his hands, the girl thought, "At last, here it is. She has nothing to worry about. Let him say so, but Gaspar has a gentle nature." But at that moment Graf threw the wreath on the floor and stomped it with his foot, saying he didn't know why she was giving him that garbage. He ordered her to do no more useless things and disappear from his sight. Leonore thought that no matter how much he felt betrayed by Noelle, there was no way Gaspar would have said those words. With these thoughts, the girl turned to him and called out to him, "Hey!" Hearing this, the man turned around and asked how she could call out to him like that. But at that moment the girl flew straight at him and kicked him in the legs so that he fell. On the floor, Leonore said that he wasn't her daddy after all. At that moment, the man wondered how a child could have such power. 3 years ago, on the night before his ascension to the throne, as soon as the man woke up, he found himself in the body of a duke. When he looked forward, he saw Duchess Noelle, daughter of the Marquis of Yaren. The girl asked if he was all right. The man stood up and coughed. Then she asked what was happening to him. Looking at her, the duke realized she was also naked. He didn't understand what was even going on. Maybe she was using some kind of drug on him. He told her to start by getting dressed. She asked, "Does it really have to be done now?" He said of course. After he was in Duke's body, he didn't even notice that it was someone else's body. At that moment, he thought that the fact that this girl was here was definitely some kind of ploy by Marquis Yaren. The Marquis was the one who maintained Gregor's admiration for the throne as emperor. Now that his coronation is confirmed, he tries to use his daughter to manipulate him. The man started to get out of bed and said they needed to clarify one thing. He said that if a child came out of what happened that day, he would not accept it as his own. But at that moment, Noelle came up to him and looked at him. At that moment, the man thought, "Is she trying to change his mind with her beauty?" But it won't work on him. The man had let his guard down at that moment, and Noelle took advantage of the situation. She grabbed him by his shirt and slapped him across the face with all her strength. Then she looked at him with a frightened look and asked him who he was. "He is not her husband, Gaspar." From that day on, he was imprisoned in Duke's body, and it was only when the moon rose that he was able to use his body to move at will. At that moment, sitting on the floor and looking at his daughter, he thought she was a carbon copy of her mom. Leonore shouted at the man and asked who he was, for he was not her father, but he answered her nothing. She asked if he could hear her at all. At this point she kicked him in the leg, and he asked if she would stop doing that. When Leonore moved away from him a little, he told her that he was actually her father. The girl was surprised at this news, and she asked again. Then the man repeated that he was her father, and according to the oracle, he had taken over Gaspar's body. When the mother had a baby girl at that time, her mother leaked into the new life, and an illegitimate child of the imperial family appeared. The girl didn't understand what it all meant. She asked, "Is he really her father?" After thinking for a bit, the man said he didn't have time to waste on her anyway, so let her go. The time he can stay in this body is short, and he must find out who put this curse on him and find his body. But Leonora grabbed him by his clothes and said he couldn't be her real daddy. She asked who he was. But at that moment the man pushed her away and asked, "Is she completely deaf? Let her go. She's a little girl. She looks like she wants to die." He said he still didn't like the fact that his mom had flowed over to her. Here, he's just about to swallow her back up. At that moment he directed his hand towards her. The girl didn't realize what was happening. She felt as if all the strength was leaving her body. She realized that she was about to pass out. In a pleading voice, Leonore said she was in pain. And at that moment the Duke came to his senses. He stopped hurting her. The girl saw this and asked, "Is that her daddy?" The man told her to run as fast as she could, and with those words he began to draw his blade. At that moment he plunged his sword straight into his stomach. Leonore couldn't understand what was happening. Her father was back, why he was hurting himself, The girl shouted for him not to do that and came to her senses. At that moment some man was passing near them and heard the voice of the young mistress. When he ran up, he asked what she was doing here. He replied that it was dangerous, and let her get away from the Duke. But the girl tried to move her knife hand away from his body. She shouted that she could not have her father stabbing himself. But the worker came up to them, took the girl in his arms, and struck the Duke on the arm, so that the knife fell out of his hand. At that moment the Duke fell to the floor, bleeding. He was exhausted. The worker put the girl on the floor and asked if she was okay. Leonora replied that she was fine. But here's the father. She told Henry to get a doctor right away. I mean, he's bleeding to death. Henry said he would be right back and ran. Leonore thought at that moment that he had it written all over his face. That misunderstanding of why she was worried about her father in that situation. This situation looked as if the father was going to end his life. Suicide for losing Noel. She supposed he might have imagined it. She couldn't feel Manu. Then she would have thought so too. It wasn't just in character that he had changed. She felt a foreign mana, and after all, her father was a shadow knight. So Leonore immediately realized that some kind of psycho was in Gaspar's body. And if she's in that body now, you can't say it's impossible. The girl approached the Duke, asking if he would wake up soon. With these words, she hugged him. After a while, rumors were already starting to spread around the manor. One of the maids asked if they had heard that the head of the family had not yet regained consciousness. The other replied to her that who would have thought the Duke would make such a drastic decision. Who knows what might have happened without the Duchess around. After the rumor spread that she was an illegitimate child, the man turned his back on the young mistress. But for such a kind child to still be living in the annex, the maids thought it strange. In the evening, Leonore, when she returned to her room, looked into the book, and realized that the next page of the book was still blank. For she wondered how things were now. The content of the book is written in real time, so nothing can be done about it. And as long as Inessa is a child, there will be no changes in the book. Thought strange events keep happening. She should be prepared for anything. Great that she has plenty of mana as it can be used. It would be nice if she had Roman to help her. As far as she could remember, until the moment Inez met the Archmage, and learning her magic is still a long way off. But when they meet, the girl seems to be in danger, and needs to try to remember what she read in her past life. There was definitely magic in Leonora's body, and she could use it. You don't have to make her use it, because there are already those who are targeting her Manu in her path. The next morning when the girl woke up, she thought to check on her father's condition. As she walked out into the hallway, she met Nora on the way and asked, "Lala, is she in the main building now?" The woman ignored her questions and said that she had heard that the gentleman was in such a state because of her. Nora asked how the girl dared to harm the master. Leonore thought at that moment that she had forgotten all about her. Then suddenly the woman took and started shaking the girl, telling her not to dare harm the master because she too felt all the pain he was feeling. The girl wondered what else she could be feeling there. Could she be Gaspar's spiritual twin? Leonore realized she couldn't use her power like she used to because of that psycho trying to suck the mana out of her yesterday. Suddenly Nora said, "It can't be helped, and a bad child must be punished." With these words she took the whip in her hand. The girl at this point thought, does she really want to scare her with this, after the childhood she had in her past life? And laughed a little even. Nora, seeing this, said she was a cheeky little thing. I can't believe she's laughing so hard at that. Well, all of a sudden someone touched her and she said, "Who dared to yank her shoulder?" It was the Count. He approached the woman and asked what she was doing. Nora, when she saw the gentleman, was at once kindly, and said that, at last he woke up, and thought to herself that he had also put his hand on her shoulder. But the Count told her to answer his question. The girl said she just wanted to give the young ribbon a lesson in good manners. At that moment the man said, "A lesson in good manners, you say?" He raised his hand at her, and a bright light poured out of it. Seeing this, Leonore thought that the one inside her father was using aura on an ordinary person. She hadn't expected such a thing. Nora turned and asked what the gentleman was doing. But he said that she was trying to teach the child what she had not learned at her age. When the girl wanted to say something to him, he wasn't listening. The man snapped his fingers, and at that moment, Nora vanished. Eleanor, seeing this, was very surprised. She did not understand where this woman was going. She turned to the father and asked why she did all this and came. The man said, "Daddy came to see his daughter, and asked, Should there be any reason for that? Leonore says she needs one, and she's told him several times that he's not her father. When she asked who he was, the man said that he had definitely hidden his mana this time. And how could she even understand? I figured he could hide all he wanted. The aura around him would give him away. Anybody could tell. And she said her dad doesn't treat people that way. Even with a servant who harms his children? He asked. The girl replied that yes, and instead he would give her the punishment she deserved. The man replied that this was very foolish and naive. Leonore agreed with that. But then she thought and remembered that this man could be dangerous. So she asked, "Has he come to kill her again? Also, does he really think she won't resist him like she did last time?" The man asked, wondering what she was even saying. Leonore explained that he had sucked the mana out of her yesterday, thus trying to kill her. Because in this world, mana equals life. The Count said he wasn't going to take everything by killing her. What would be the point of killing a little child? What he'd look like in other people's eyes? Leonore said he would definitely look like a thief who stole his father's body, or a bad man who stole his father's body, or maybe the hot-headed bastard who stole his father's body. When the man got angry and said maybe he should kill that nasty girl after all, Leonore thought at that moment that she hadn't realized that Daddy's face could make such a scary expression. The man said she could be quiet because he thought he could still use her. The girl was surprised and asked what for. The Count had said he had been in this body for 3 years, though he could only keep it under control for a short time. But other than that, she had noticed his presence in it. Unlike her brothers, she could tell the difference between him and the Duke, even though he hid his presence. "All in your words," he began to move closer to the girl. And on top of all that, her little body contains quite a bit of his mana. Eleanor was very angered by this phrase of his mana, and she said he could leave if he was going to bullshit about her being his child. The Count said he hasn't figured out the reasons yet, but he's sure his mana is in her soul. The body belongs to the Duke and his wife. When Leonora heard that, she thought it meant that her mother had not betrayed her father. Then she is not an illegitimate child. Thinking about it, the girl asked then who he was in the end, and why he was in his father's body. The man smiled and said he wasn't here because he wanted to be. He said his name, Lucas Villanin. The girl, when she heard Villanin, thought that somewhere she had heard that name often. After a little thought, she realized that he was Emperor Gregor's half-brother. Lucas said that he was the one who was officially supposed to take the throne. However, the day before he ascended the throne, he was ambushed. The cursed egregore had cowardly put a curse on him, and when he opened his eyes, he was already trapped in this body, regardless of his will. Leonora thought killing all her brothers and ascending to the throne was like a classic How to Become a Tyrant training course. She asked then where her father was now. Lucas said that he was inside him. He can't stay in this body for long, so he needs to get his body back as soon as possible. The girl was relieved that her father was all right. She thought he would never come back. She feels better now that she knows Daddy is safe, but she doesn't know what to do with this man. Just the thought of the Emperor makes him furious. Leonora thought that if she tried hard enough, she might find some use for him. Then she asked Lucas if he wanted to get rid of the Emperor with her. The man, hearing this, smiled and asked what she meant. Emperor Gregor is now a tyrant. One day he will become the father of the protagonist Inez and destroy the family of Duke Hachania. Leonora thought the enemy of her enemy was her friend. "You said that earlier, didn't you?" He said she could be useful. The girl said that, as he must have noticed by now, she is an unusual child and knows things that are unknown to him. Above all, by teaming up with her, he loses nothing. Lucas thought it would be a win-win, since a duke from the Emperor's faction, he former crown prince, couldn't let anyone know of his existence. It only restricts his movement. However, there is also no time at all to find a way to break the curse because of the duke's duty. So he agreed. The girl was surprised and thought it was somehow too easy. She thought maybe he agreed because she was a child. She thought she couldn't just make a deal like that, and needed something to seal it. So she held out her little finger to him, and asked him if he could promise her. He said yes. Leonora said that the contract was valid until he returned to his body, and Hachania became an independent duchy. She asked how he felt about such terms. But Lucas retracted his little finger and asked, "What else is the independence of the duchy? Is she now in front of the Emperor talking about the independence of the Duchy of Hachania?" The girl said it was too late to refuse anyway. At that moment, purple fire appeared beneath their feet. They sealed their promises with the magician's contract. Lucas asked how this little girl could know about black magic. Leonora answered that she had already told him that she was an unusual child. The mage's contract is the most commonly used magic in the original. Leonora was surprised that he thought she would make an alliance without guarantees. And now if he betrays her, all his mana will go to the girl. The next day was the regular meeting as usual. The Count sat and listened attentively. Leonora thought that he had said himself that he could not stay in his father's case for long, hadn't he? She did not understand why he was still in her father's body. Once when she was walking with her father, Ado stopped and asked if he loved her. Gaspar sat down and took her hands in his, saying that he naturally loved her more than he loved anyone in this world. The girl never tried to be the smartest kid, or become outstanding at anything, as if she didn't have to try to be loved. At Hachania's meeting, the Imperial Palace Administrator spoke that first of all, he would like to express his condolences to the Duchy for the Oracle's information. The manager's name was Ronald. He said that, however, there was no need for the head of the family to make cruel decisions. They would not take the Duchess to the palace. The Count indifferently said to do as they wished. The girl looked at him and thought to do his duties normally. Seeing her reaction, he immediately asked who dared to make such a decision. He wasn't going to send her to the Imperial Palace. Ronald said that according to the Oracle, the princess was the daughter of His Highness Lucas, who had disappeared. But since the truth cannot be revealed without her father, it would be appropriate for her to remain in the Imperial Palace until His Highness is located. Besides, rumors have reached them that His Excellency the Duke is at odds with the young Duchess, Ronald asked. In other words, are you saying that you don't believe that the young Duchess has the blood of the imperial family in her? The girl thought at this moment that they had all come knowing the truth, but the Count said that wasn't true, and they have a good enough relationship. The aide was very surprised and said that ever since the Oracle appeared, there had been rumors that he and the young Duchess were in a relationship. But he didn't have time to finish because Gaspar slammed his fist on the table and replied that he had already said they had a good relationship. Not understanding why the Count reacted the way he did. After all, he had evicted the girl to the annex himself. Leonora wondered why he was being so stubborn now. At that moment the Count looked at the girl. Leonora did not understand why he was looking at her like that, but when he beckoned her with his finger, she realized that it was necessary to maintain a good relationship. When the girl got up from the table and started to walk over to him saying, "Daddy, did you call for Leah?" The Count replied in a cold voice that he had. She thought to herself, he did say to come over, and now he's acting so badly. You can also tell they're lying. It's too obvious. There was nothing left for her to do but take matters into her own hands, she thought. I told him to give her a hug. And she thought to herself that she'd be a cutie. At that moment the Count took her by the dress. Leonora thought he was some kind of lunatic. She had asked for a hug, not a lift, as if it were some kind of thing. But she was able to get out of the situation. The girl laughed and said it was a lot of fun and she liked it. She figured she was a professional at this, and wouldn't be embarrassed by such a thing. So she pulled herself closer to the Count and hugged him gently. At that moment he put his hand on the table so that it cracked. I thought he was a psychopath. Why would he break on the table? She didn't know if he was even going to hide his temper. So she told him to calm down. The people who had just sat at the table were shocked because it was shattered. But Gregor said that His Excellency the Duke was so reluctant to part with the young Duchess. Leonora thought he was thinking very well. He said they're such a cute couple. It's impossible to even stop watching. I thought they'd get through it safely tonight. When the meeting was over, I told everyone that they would contact them later. Have a good trip. Ronald said they would see each other again soon, and he hoped to hear a different answer then. When they left, the girl thought it had ended happily, and said that judging from the fact that they had left in such a hurry, they seemed to be very much afraid of the Duke. When he said nothing, she asked him why he was silent. Leonora thought maybe he was frozen because she'd given him a little smack. She told him to finally come to his senses. She didn't do it because she wanted to either. But then suddenly, when he came to his senses a little, he said, "Leia." The girl at that moment wondered if he had called her by her name. She hadn't expected that. She wondered if she'd heard it right. But then she realized that if he had, it wasn't Lucas I was conscious of now. Realizing this, she ran up to him and shouted out joyfully, "Daddy! Daddy, is that you?" Gaspar apologized to her for taking so long to come around and said she must have had a hard time. He said he didn't understand how that was even possible, how Lucas Willinen could be in his body. Then he asked, "Does that mean the missing crown prince isn't dead?" Leonora wondered, and wondered how he knew he had Lucas in his body, but realized that wasn't the most important thing right now. She asked her father if he would send her to the imperial palace because she wasn't his daughter. Thought that seemed completely unfair after Lucas's explanation. The Duke asked, wondering what this nonsense was all about. No matter who says what, she's still his daughter, and he's not sending her anywhere. Leonora said he did send her to the annex, but the man explained that he did it to protect her from the Emperor, and unlike her brothers, she hadn't yet learned how to defend herself on her own, so he decided that she could hide in a separate building. The girl was amazed. She had not even thought that the reason could be like that. Then he started pulling a piece of paper out of his pocket and told her to look at it. He said it was a letter from the temple, and it said who was the illegitimate child of the imperial family. With these words, he handed the girl the letter and said that he wasn't going to look at it. In a moment, he took the letter and tore it up. The girl was very surprised at this, but the Duke said that Zachary, Sylvester, Enoch, and Leia were all his precious children. Something she couldn't have in her past life, Leonora thought. No matter how hard she'd tried her whole life, Leonora had gotten it too easily, simply because she'd been born the daughter of this man. She said, "What if those from the palace continue to insist on their own way?" He said he would rebel against his majesty and die a dignified death in that case. The girl thought it was wrong, because of the way Daddy was. In the original novel, the family was wiped out, but she was happy with the idea that, if anything, he was back, and needed to see if there were any changes in the original. So she said she was going to go to the annex to rest for a while. But Gaspar stopped her, and said she could go back to the main building right now, replied that she wasn't going, and thought it would be easier to hide the book of the original novel there, and said she wanted to be away from Daddy. The Duke was shocked, and she said she wanted to be very, very far away, and thought to herself that he just needed to wait patiently until she found a way. At this very time in the annex of the Imperial Palace, Inez was very angry. She thought that the Duke saying he wouldn't send Leonora to the Imperial Palace was, and wasn't surprised. She had already encountered this a few times in the past, but she thought that even for such actions of the Duke, she had a plan prepared that she was going to put into action. When Leonora read all this, she was surprised that she had a plan to send her to the Imperial Palace. But she didn't understand why her plan wasn't in the book. As always, everything gets cut short at the most important part. If she used mana, she would be able to see the contents further. When she tried that, she thought that judging from the fact that there was no reaction, there was no further content yet. But really, Leonora is afraid to see something more shocking. Inez had been reborn a great many times. The girl thought that originally there was no such thing, and didn't understand why things had changed. The biggest change is her, and that's probably how it affected this world. And the maids came in and said, "Isn't she looking at the blank pages of a book again?" The second asked if she was not bored just sitting there. Said that her brother Andre is now off the estate with the young Duke of Soloa. And Lala said that young Duke Tristan, along with the young Dukes of Hakania, are about to enter the Imperial Academy. Tristan J. Soloa Gulam, the main male character in the novel. He was a leading figure in the downfall of the Hachenia family, someone who was on good terms with Enoch and Sylvester. Come to think of it, he turned out to be an idiot too. Gaspar, who had lost his temper over his daughter's death, kidnapped Inez without harming her in any way. In the meantime, Tristan joined the Emperor to mercilessly exterminate the Kachania family. This novel is more brutal than it seems. The protagonist is a cunning vixen who tries to take away Manule, and the protagonist is a psychopath who destroys her family to vent his anger. As a result, Inez was the one who got the cure and survived. Besides, Zachary, who had gotten her the elixir, was also from the Hachenia family. Shouldn't that have been discounted, the girl thought? If you think about it that way, everything goes against Leonora. She wondered if Lucas could prevent the family from being destroyed. She still can't figure out how to get the elixir. She can't just ask the first brother she's never seen before. "I'll think about it," she addressed the maid. Said she was going to her daddy's house. The girl thought that would be a great idea. The reason why Zachary, and not the protagonist Tristan, finds the legendary elixir of Panish is simple. It is because Tristan, the leader of the Empire's greatest knights, whose clan was absent due to the civil war in the Duchy of Soloa. Zachary was the leader of the Halen military group that was as powerful as Tristan's knights. It is not Zachary who is important here, but the knight in command of Halen. Who will replace Tristan? What if someone else becomes commander of the knights instead of Zachariah, who is in love with Inez? If that person is someone she likes, then the elixir will become her.